Welcome to Forum 360 on Fusion, your PBS channel. Thank you for joining us on our global outlook with a local view. This is Leslie Ungar, your host today. Meetings. We all attend them, lead them, participate in them, bless them, appreciate them, swear at them, and swear by them. Whether the meeting is by phone, Skype, FaceTime, or in person. Did you ever think about why are you having a meeting? Sometimes you find out you have a meeting and you are thrilled. Wow, I got that life-changing meeting. Other times you find out that you have a meeting and your response is dread. Am I being fired? One definition of a meeting is an assembly of people for a particular purpose, especially for formal discussion. To help us navigate the meeting world today, we have meeting expert Mamie Kanfer Stewart. Mamie is co-author of the book Momentum, Creating Effective, Enjoyable, and Engaging Meetings, now available on Amazon. Now, take us back to perhaps one of the first meetings you ever attended. Can you remember any particularly good or bad meetings in your history?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So I remember one meeting that I was attending. I was the only person in the room who was probably under the age of 40, and I was in my early 20s. And I sat in the meeting silent for almost the entire 3 hours because I just didn't feel like I could talk. It was not a welcoming space. And I waited and waited and waited, and then finally I said one thing, and I was so proud of myself for speaking up. And that was one of the moments where I realized afterwards that, wow, like, no one said, Mamie, don't talk. No one said, oh, you're young, you don't belong here. But that was the part of it was the vibe I got in the room, and part of it was my comfortability being in that space. And, you know, afterwards I was a little bit sad that I didn't speak up more.
But on the other side, did anyone say, gee, we'd like to hear?
No, and that's part of it, right? If you're not asking people who are quiet for their ideas, they might have a hard time jumping in. They may not feel like their ideas are welcome in that table. And so it's so important for those of us who tend to talk a lot, because now I go to meetings and I talk the whole time. So if you're the kind of person that talks a lot, it's important to make space and invite other people to talk as well.
Let's start before an actual meeting takes place, okay? In your world, when is a meeting necessary, advisable, or even helpful?
Yes. So meetings are only one form of communication, right? That's what we tend to forget, is that meetings are kind of in the same bucket as emails or writing a memo, something like that. They're all just different ways that we're communicating. And so a meeting is good for a couple of reasons. One, if you need real-time discussion, you need a bunch of people making sense together. If I need feedback from 4 different people, I don't need them all to be in the same room to give feedback on a document or a presentation, right? I maybe need to just go to each one of them separately, which would be a different kind of meeting, but I don't need them all together to be bouncing ideas off of.
So how would a person know when they need them together and when they can use their contributions separately?
Yeah, so there are a couple questions you can ask.
Okay.
So one of the questions is, do the people need to hear each other's ideas? Is that actually going to help us move the work forward, or do I need to hear their ideas? So that's one way. The second is, how urgent is this? So do I have time to get, you know, one person's ideas and then another person's ideas and then circle back to the first person? Because sometimes it's, you know, you need to kind of go through a process and then ultimately everyone has to make a decision together, but you can take time to hear from different people and to make revisions and then pull it all together at the end. Other times, if you got to move fast, you got to get everybody in the room because you don't have time to wait to hear from this person or that person, or waiting for an email chain for people to respond. So urgency can be another reason why you'd want to get everyone into the room at the same time.
Now, will the same rules apply to a meeting that everyone is not in the same room, but they're on FaceTime or they're
Absolutely.
a GoToMeeting, so the same rules apply?
Absolutely. When I say get everyone in the same room, I mean physically or virtually. Get everybody real time on the line in a physical space, on video call, whatever it is, but where people can use their voices and hear each other in real time.
Okay, so much of your experience has been in the nonprofit world. Are meeting challenges the same for people that are in the for-profit world?
Yes.
Challenges are challenges?
Yeah, a lot of them are the same. I think about 80% of the meetings, we use the 80-20 rule generally, about 80% of the meetings that people go to have the same problems. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter how many people are in the room, what level of the organization you're talking about.
Okay.
The problems are generally the same.
So if you had to identify, well, let's first go a positive path. 3 things that people do right. If there are 3 things that people do right. 3 things that people do right when it comes to meetings, either calling them or participating in them. What are 3 things that people do right?
Oh, that's hard. I've never been asked that question before.
Well, then let's flip it to what are 3 things that people do wrong? And then maybe something will come to you. So what are 3 things that people do wrong?
Okay, so the first thing that people do wrong generally is not think about why they're having the meeting. They think about what they're going to do in the meeting. And this is a nuance that's really worth breaking apart. A lot of people will say, well, we're having a meeting to review this material before it goes out to the client, or we're going to look at last quarter's numbers and and talk about the results. Those are good activities, but we try go away from the verbs. Don't talk about reviewing and discussing and looking at and checking in. Those are nice activities, but at the end of the meeting, what are you going to have accomplished? And that's the real meat of it. Is why are you having this meeting? It's not to do something. It's to accomplish something. So we call it a desired outcome. We say start every meeting by writing a desired outcome. Before you even call the meeting, you should really figure out what that desired outcome is, which might be a decision, a list of ideas for next, or a plan for next steps.
But it's going to be a noun. It's not going to be a verb.
It's going to be a noun.
Because that's interesting. As a communication coach, that's the same thing I say about resumes. Is that people spend their time, all the things they did. I conducted. I did. But you did it for a reason.
Yes.
And the reason's a noun.
Yes.
And the result.
The result. What's the outcome? Yep.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, exactly the same thing with the meeting. And the reason we talk about this is such a big problem. It's the number one thing I tell people to do. If you're only going to do one thing different, write a desired outcome before your meeting. And that's because so many times we'll go to a meeting, and at the end you say, well, so now what? What did we actually accomplish? And yeah, maybe it was an interesting discussion, but was it a good use of our time? I don't know, because I'm not sure what we accomplished.
And probably because you don't have any criteria to judge that by.
Yeah, exactly.
But if you have a criteria, then you can say we reached it, we didn't, we kind of.
Exactly.
So if there was one thing, I've narrowed it down from 3 to 1. If there was one thing that people do right, or could do right, what was that one thing?
So actually, people do a lot of things right, and it's not that everybody is terrible at running meetings, but the things that I hear often from really good meeting leaders and people who haven't studied meetings, but it's just their natural way of being, is that they start their meeting with intention. So if you start your meeting and you just jump in, it's like, okay, so let's get down, everyone come focus. It doesn't feel like it's like a nice launching moment. And so really good meeting leaders will start their meeting and say, okay, everyone, this is why we're gathered here today. This is what we want to accomplish. And so it's somewhat using the desired outcome, but it's framing the meeting and
using it early.
Using it early, getting it in the room to begin with, because let's be honest, right? We're running from meeting to meeting. You're on phone call to phone call. You're working on one thing. Maybe your kids are yelling at you in the background. Maybe you're thinking about what you're planning for dinner. Our brains are all over the place. So when you sit down and get on that phone call or walk into that meeting room, you need to be potted. You need to be reminded and kind of ready to focus. And when a meeting leader just starts a meeting without saying, all right, everybody, how you all doing today? We're going to get started. This is why we're here. And they don't start it on a good foot. People's brains aren't ready for the conversation.
Well, then let me ask you, to start a meeting, I had a client in Parkersburg, West Virginia, who was a retired military guy, and he had this real traffic light outside of the meeting room attached to the wall.
Yeah.
And like 5 minutes before 9, it would be blinking yellow, and at 9, it would be red, and the door would lock, and you were not getting in the room if you were not in that room at 9 a.m. And you would hear people come by and test the knob, but it wasn't opening.
Yeah.
Now, I always tell my clients, it's not fair to people who are there to not start on time for the ones that aren't, but give us some thoughts on how do you start a meeting? When do you start it? Do you start it on time? What do you do with the people that aren't there yet? How do you start a meeting on time?
Yeah. So this is a cultural thing. And it depends a lot on how frequently that group of people are meeting and what kind of influence you can have over them. So it is always better to start a meeting on time because, as you said, if you don't start on time, it's really disrespectful for everybody else who's waiting, who did come up on time, and now you're waiting for them. But there are the different influences at play. So if there's a really important person, like the key decision maker or a senior member of the team who's not there and you really can't start without them, sometimes you just gotta wait.
Okay.
But other times, if you're waiting for someone and you're like, you know what, we're just gonna get started and that person will join us when they join us. And slowly over time, people will learn, oh, these meetings start on time. And if I wanna be there in the beginning, then I need to make sure I get myself there because they're gonna start whether I'm there or not. And the other thing you gotta do is if you really want meetings to start on time and you want people to show up, you can't start over when they walk in 5 or 10 minutes late. So if you're gonna start, you don't say, oh, thank you, I see you joined us now. Let me just catch you up to what we've been doing.
Let me waste all the time for the people that have been there. And
tell you everything that we just did.
Yes.
Yeah, you just gotta go in. Now, usually on a phone call, you need 1 or 2 minutes. This is the other thing about time, right? You can't get from one place to another in 0 time. So if you're coming from a meeting that ends at 10 o'clock and your next meeting starts at 10 o'clock, it's physically impossible to get from meeting room A to meeting room B that quickly. So you do have to assume that meetings are going to not end early. And so you usually have to give a few minutes for people to physically walk over to their new space or dial into the phone call, whatever it is. But 5 minutes in, you should be starting. There's no reason you should be waiting more than 5 minutes for anybody.
Okay, well, you heard it here today. As joining us today on Forum 360 is meeting expert Mamie Kanfer Stewart. Mamie is co-author of the book Momentum, Creating Effective, Enjoyable, and Engaging Meetings, now available on Amazon. Well, let's look at the other end, ending a meeting.
Yes.
So that's like one of my favorite pet peeves. Should a meeting have a set end time? Should the participants know ahead of time the end time? And what do you do if your agenda is not complete and your end time has arrived?
Yeah, well, there's lots to unpack there.
Yes, there is.
So first, absolutely, every meeting should have a start time and an end time. If you're inviting someone and you're asking them to give you their time to participate in whatever it is that you need to get done, there should clearly be a time allocation of whether it's 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour or 3 hours, people should know. The second is you should do your best to plan an agenda that will fit in that time. So this is the other problem with activities and the way people write agendas, is we write down 5 things we want to do, and that's it. And you have no idea, you haven't spent any time thinking of how much time are we going to actually spend discussing that one. And if we need to make a decision, how much time is it going to take us to go through the process of laying out the options and talking through them. So you plan an agenda, and then you get 2 or 3 agenda items in, and your time's run out because you actually didn't do the thinking ahead of time to say, wow, if we have 5 items and half an hour, in the first 5 minutes, I'm just waiting for people to come in. And then in the last 5 minutes, I want to make sure that we wrap up. I only have 20 minutes for 5 items. Are we really going to spend only 4 minutes on average? Like, probably not. So you got to plan your agenda with a little more thought to know how much time you ideally want to spend on each topic, so you're allocating the right amount of time for the meeting.
And I imagine all items are not created equal.
Definitely not.
So not all items are worthy of the same amount of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. So you got to think about it as this might just be a report, and so it's going to take me 5 minutes to just catch everybody up on what's going on, and then we're going to have 20 minutes for a discussion, and then we're going to switch into decision-making mode, and we're going to have 10 minutes to lay out the decisions and take a vote and a straw model vote, and we'll go through a little more conversation, and then we're going to move into the next phase, which might be something else. So each piece can have the appropriate time allocated to it.
So we're going to start on time or within 5 minutes. We're going to end on time.
Yes.
So that might be kind of novel concepts for some people, okay, that may be listening. How does the meeting facilitator know if they've had an effective meeting?
There are a couple ways to judge it. And one of them actually relates to the end of the meeting. So I want to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay.
So when the meeting is coming to an end, you should always have the last 5 minutes for your wrap-up or your checkout or your ending. Because just like you want to start the meeting with intention, you got to end the meeting with intention.
So it doesn't just kind of die out by the clock.
Right, and it's really uncomfortable and it doesn't feel very satisfying when you're getting close to the end of the time and people are kind of still talking about something, and then one person's like, I'm sorry, I gotta go, whatever happens is fine, and then they run out of the room, and then somebody else hangs up without even saying goodbye, and now you're 5 minutes over and people are agitated. That's not how you want your meeting to end. It doesn't feel satisfying. Even if it was a really productive meeting, it just doesn't feel good. And it's super unclear what's actually decided. What are the real decisions? What are the actual next steps?
So it needs a conclusion, just like a speech needs a conclusion.
Exactly, right? You got to tell everybody one more time, what is it that you accomplished? So you can use those last 5 minutes to articulate exactly what decisions were made and what the next steps are, and ask for volunteers or owners. So if you have a next step, who's going to do that and when are they going to get it done? Which is one way then to be able to say, was this a productive meeting? Was this a good use of people's time? Did we get to a clear decision? Did we have some next steps coming out of it? And if you do, you can celebrate and people walk out feeling really good. And if you don't, as a facilitator, you know you didn't quite get the group there.
Okay, so a really important question, because after all, this is very important in America. Food or no food at meetings?
Depends on the meeting and depends on the moment in time. So food is often a wonderful way to get people together. If you're going to have a meeting over lunch, you should give people food. They're going to be hungry and they're not going to be as focused if they're hungry.
Now, if you have good food, will that make your meeting better? Will people's thoughts of your meeting be better if, say, you have, better food, let's say, versus not?
Not so much that if it's better food. If it's terrible food, they will remember the terrible food. But if it's at least decent food, it's fine. But also, if it's not a mealtime, it can be awkward. Nobody wants to be the one person that's eating while nobody else is. So it's much better to, if it's gonna be a breakfast meeting or a lunch meeting or something, then have food for everybody and it's clear that you're supposed to eat. And if it's just gonna be snacks and things, don't expect people to eat that much, because nobody wants to be talking with their mouth full.
Sure. Now, as you started researching meetings, did you discover anything as you were writing this book that surprised you?
Yeah, actually, a couple things. But one of the more interesting ones was how few people have thought about meetings. Right? We all go to them, as you said in intro. We all talk about them. We all spend hours and hours a day. And very few people have actually stopped to say, hey, I wonder if there's a different way to do this. I wonder if there's books on this, or if there's...
Just keep doing the same.
We just do the same thing, and we assume, this is just how it has to be. There's no way to fix this problem. And it's actually very easy to fix. As some of the things we've talked about, it's not rocket science to end your meeting by saying, okay, guys, what did we decide today?
Or even to end your meeting on time.
And end your meeting on time, right? And if you need to have another meeting afterwards, then you say, I'm sorry we didn't get through the whole agenda. I appreciate everyone's time. We're going to wrap up now to respect everybody's time, and I'll follow up about scheduling another meeting to get through the rest of the agenda, right? It's not rocket science, people. But no one stops. Very few people stop to say, maybe I should try and do my meetings a little differently.
No, that is absolutely true. Now, I have a question. I heard a woman, Dr. Erin Reeves, speak a couple weeks ago, and as a researcher, she claims that what we write down by hand, we remember more than what we key into a laptop or an iPad. Your thoughts?
I don't think we remember anything these days. I'll just be super honest.
Doesn't matter how you do it.
It doesn't matter how you do it. I
Okay.
feel like we are so busy, at least people who are working full-time jobs and their lives are complicated with maybe children and family and social engagements and work projects. We're just so inundated with information that it doesn't matter how you write it down, you're not going to remember it. To me, the thing is that it's written down somewhere where you can go back and look at it, because that's what's going to help you remember it.
Now, do you have any preference? I understand that at Smucker's, people are not allowed to bring in a laptop or an iPad. Do you have any thoughts what people should bring into a meeting?
Yes. So what we found to be most successful is for teams to make that a decision that the team owns. So rather than saying technology is all bad, don't bring any devices, or technology is all good, everybody bring a laptop and we'll all be on, the team should decide, how do we want to use technology to support the meeting? So if that means one person should have their laptop because they're taking notes, or if that means that nobody should or everyone should, it should be a group discussion to come to some conclusion, because there's no one right answer.
That's interesting, because the same researcher went down that same path, that people aren't rewarded in teams, so people don't act as teams in the business world because they're not rewarded as teams. They don't make decisions as teams. If your magic wand worked, how many hours a week would you suggest a professional spend in business meetings?
I'm going to give a very unsatisfying answer, which is as many as you need to get your work done.
Well, actually, when I remember in college, if you asked a professor how long did the report have to be, the answer I dreaded the most was long enough to cover the topic and short enough to do it succinctly.
Yes.
Because that's harder. Your answer is
Yes.
actually harder than
Yes.
just giving them a number.
Exactly, and because everybody's job is different, the topics and the responsibilities and the projects that they work on, the kind of organization you have, the other methods of communication at your disposal, how many people are on the team. There's so many different factors, so you can't just say everyone should be in
Magic
meetings
number.
for 10 minutes, for 10 hours. It depends on your job. Some people should be in meetings all day long because that's their job and that's the best way that they can get their job done. Other people should never be in meetings. So it really just depends.
I'm a never. In the couple minutes that we have left, I'm going to ask you for some 1 or 2 word answers. One thing that people can take from our conversation that they could do differently in regard to meetings.
Write a desired outcome.
And one thing they should stop doing.
Going to meetings that you know you shouldn't be in.
You were raised in Akron, now living in Brooklyn, New York. The center of the universe apparently is now Brooklyn. Do you miss anything from Akron?
You know, I'm going to say a little longer answer. I was driving through here to get here, and the trees are just beautiful. I forgot how lovely the city can be.
Oh, that's nice. If your magic wand worked, how would you make Northeast Ohio different? As you have a little different perspective now sitting in Brooklyn, how would you make Northeast Ohio different?
Oh, I don't know. Honestly, I don't think I have a good answer to that. I have very fond memories of Northeast Ohio.
And running a camp.
Running a camp for kids, yes. That was my first business I started when I was 12.
12, of course. What is one way that we can prepare differently for a meeting?
Write an agenda, actually write it out and share it with people ahead of time so their expectations are set.
And I have to ask you, what was it like to fly through the air?
To fly?
Yes, through the air. And your trapeze?
Oh, I was like in an airplane.
And your trapeze, because, I don't know very many people that have gone on a trapeze.
Oh yes, I love trapeze. So to me, the trapeze is safe risk. You are flying through the air. It is exhilarating. You're jumping off a platform. It's just a whole body experience, but you're in a harness with a net underneath you. So there's pretty much nothing that can go wrong.
Did you feel like someone in the circus?
Sometimes. I also sometimes felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest.
Now, the we taped a show earlier about Israel, and you and your family were in Israel earlier in the summer. What is one thing you would want people to know about Israel that may never go there, or may not have been there in a long time since you were recently there? What is one thing you would want people to know about Israel?
So when we were there, we visited a Yad Bayad school, which is a multicultural school that has Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And the work that people are doing there to bridge divides is really incredible, and I don't think we hear enough about it in America.
Yeah, see, I come back and say the beaches are great, and you come back and actually say something that is important and that could help people. So now, when was the last time that you were in Israel? Before that, it had been a while?
It had been a while. I think before I had children.
So did anything surprise you from the time that you had last been there?
All the construction in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It's just a growing city, and there's always some new buildings and new archaeological digs and all that good stuff happening.
Well, today we looked at something that you see every day. Have you ever thought about how much of your week is spent in meetings? Do you think about what makes a meeting more effective or less effective? Does your company take meetings seriously? These are questions that our guest today, Mamie Kanfer Stewart, has asked and answered in her book, Momentum, Creating Effective, Enjoyable, and Engaging Meetings. Whether you spend 6 hours a week or 20 hours a week, most Americans spend a lot of time in meetings. Perhaps now you have a better idea of how to problem solve for your next meeting, how to decline a meeting if it doesn't meet your objective, and how to create a meeting that brings the best out in people. Thank you for joining us on Forum 360. I'm Leslie Ungar with your global outlook and local view.
Forum 360 is brought to you by Electrical Impulse Communications, the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, Hudson Community Television, the Rubber City Radio Group, an anonymous donor, the Jewish Community Board of Akron, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Blue Green, and Forum 360 supporters.